Let me just get my windows all situated here. All right, the kind of obligatory, can you see my screen?
You can indeed.
Cool. Well, first and foremost, thanks, Michelle, for having me, for giving me the opportunity to come speak at the meetup. I'm kind of like a long-term supporter / lurker. I've been to a lot of these, but this is actually my first time speaking, so I'm pretty excited. Maybe a little bit ill-prepared, but we'll see. You guys have to let me know at the end. So I'm going to go through these slides. If you guys have any questions, you can just stop and ask. Michelle, if you can kind of help out manning the chat, or if someone has a question, I'm happy to stop and answer it in real time. All right, let's get going. Right, so nice to meet everyone. My name's Kyle. I'm Director of Product Design at Infotech. I've been there for about 14 years, mostly in an engineering role. I also am a co-organizer of Gainesville Bar Camp, which is an unconference that we run here in Gainesville, Florida once a year. It's been on hiatus due to COVID, but coming back soon. I also help co-organize Gainesville Front End Awesome, which is our local front end meetup. I love design and user experience, also hiking, traveling. My dog is a Shiba Inu, and fancy coffees of all flavors. A little bit about Infotech. Infotech has been around for, maybe 43 years, 44 years now. We create software that supports basically all aspects of road construction projects. So secure online sealed bidding, document signing, estimation, inspection. We mostly work with State Department of Transportations and other users in that ecosystem. So think prime, subcontractors, suppliers, and consultants. We have a variety of different tech stacks and mostly web applications. We do have some mobile applications. We do pretty typical agile software development, different product teams with different, product owners and designers and engineers across those teams. So before we jump into kind of design operations, I thought it'd be interesting to kind of dig into some of the typical problems designers on design teams might face. These problems can lead to friction, which ultimately leads to a slowdown in production and, applications make it to market. So you tend to see things like designers working in isolation, not having access to other departments like engineering or marketing. Over the last couple of years, there's been definitely a rise in complexity in design tools and solutions. Also not a clear path for designers. They work on their teams in isolation. They might end up pushing pixels when they could be adding a lot more strategic value. And again, speed of delivery tends to be the biggest measurement of success versus did we actually solve a customer problem. So design ops, what is it? I mean, simply put, it is a person or a team that take care of all the operations side of design. And it lets designers focus on, what they do best. Well, designers and researchers, their craft, their design, their research. The goal really being to keep the team efficient and protect them from getting bogged down in non-design related activities. Obviously, you can't prevent everything, but again, the goal is to protect the team, remove any bottlenecks or obstacles in the design process, and let them focus on their craft. That should lead to, the very best design and research outcomes for the app and then our customers. And when you think about design ops, you can kind of loosely organize it around 4 buckets, 4 pillars. Process is a big one, team coordination, design tools, and then culture. I'll dive into these here. So design process is what I've spent most of my time kind of refining over the last couple of years. It's everything from developing a unified design language across your product suite, creation and adoption of a design system and how you might work on it for continuous improvement, different workflows, what's working, what's not, handoff processes, day-to-day activities, things like design reviews and success metrics, and making sure you're meeting the needs of the different teams that you're supporting. It's also nuanced like delivery. Who needs to see the work when? How do you respond to feedback? How do you organize that feedback? Those kind of things. And then what's new to me is all the research we're digging into. So your different research methods, how you deliver your insights. Recruiting has been a tough one that I didn't anticipate. Your analytical capability, and much, much more. And this is a late edition slide, but I wanted to show it. It's a bit overwhelming, but I would say research and all of the activities around user research could in it of itself be its own kind of talk, like research ops, as it's been coined here. So again, all of the different activities around research. And one thing that we've kind of been struggling with and trying to figure out how to solve, and I think it's just going to take time, is like recruiting a stable base of customers that you can use for research. You don't want to keep going back to the same folks over and over again, but kind of growing that customer base and educating your customer base that, hey, we have a research team, we want to work with you to make the products better, and kind of getting over that hump. But yeah, just wanted to stop and kind of show. I know you guys probably can't see it, but when I share the slides, you can check it out. Just all of the different activities that focus around user research. All right, back to the pillars. Team coordination. This is kind of the, let's call them businessy aspects of design operations. Worrying about budgeting. How much does the design team cost and why? Forecasting for upcoming projects. Do we have the right people with the right skills? Also setting recruiting standards, job ads, descriptions, phone screening, everything that kind of revolves around the talent management aspects of design operations. These kind of come into play when I was scaling up the team and figuring out what we needed and how to find that person or persons, whether it was the researchers or UI designers. Design tools, again, another main pillar. Determine what tools your design team needs to work efficiently. You also want to take in consideration purchasing, when you want to standardize a tool, and how to pilot new tools. And also, I get this one a lot, when to abandon existing tools. A question I get a lot from other designers and some engineers on the front end team is, why are we still on Sketch and not using Figma? For us, we're still on Sketch, not necessarily. I do like Sketch. I also like Figma. I use it on side projects, but the switching cost is quite high versus like what it would give us. So you have to consider things like, okay, what would it take to switch our whole design system over to Figma versus Sketch, and what is it buying us? So kind of having those conversations. Certainly, with some of the my design team on this talk, the door isn't completely closed on it yet, but I have to consider where it fits with other projects. And I have to be able to sell that to my boss. Why did you switch midstream to Figma? The answer can't be because I don't know. Or Philip, you have a question?
That's interesting. You're talking about switching to Figma, because we just switched from Figma to Zeppelin.
To Zeppelin?
Yeah.
Oh man. Why'd you guys switch?
I don't know what prompted that decision. Being that I'm the developer, not the designer.
Okay.
We had a lot of things that were in Figma, and then they decided probably about 6 months ago they're going to start moving everything over to Zeppelin. I don't know if it had to do with integrations with Jira or what the deal was, but that was the decision they made.
Philip,
yeah, I think
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Alex.
Just low key, how's it going, man? And also, is the move to Zeppelin? It wasn't like, it doesn't feel like an upgrade over Figma, does it?
I don't know. From my perspective, I just need the pictures. I don't
Yes,
really
need
do
the
it too much.
pictures.
Yeah, I mean, I just need the pictures and like what the colors are and everything, and I go ahead and I'll make that front end. I'll make it look just like the mock-ups. As far as the tooling is concerned, I don't know if there's a huge difference on the designer side or not.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with Zeppelin. So it could be kind of one of the, we do kind of have a slightly awkward, we use Sketch and InVision and Abstract. these design tools are changing constantly over time. I think the one that's probably going to end up getting sunset for our team is probably InVision, because Sketch Teams has gotten really good over the years and they keep getting better as like a one-stop shop kind of design tool. But yeah, I'll let you guys know if we switch to Figma. But right now, the answer is probably not. Timing is just not right. But these are the kind of conversations you have around design tooling. You want to kind of weigh out the pros and cons, and ultimately these tools are supposed to make you better and faster. That's the reason you'd switch.
When you're doing that kind of decision making, are you typically literally trying them out long term? Are you doing like a quick trial of each different tool? Like, what does your exposure level look like when you're making these decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, we're not trying them out long term. It's kind of like a quick high level look at a couple of things. Things that are important to us is like sharing it with people who don't have seats. Like how does that work? How easy is it? How frictionless is it? The cost for the seats for the team. Kind of doing, let's call it feature parity comparison. Like this one does this one does that. We'll try it out. I tried out Figma. I think maybe Alex has used it before. I'm not sure about Hank. But if we get serious about it, we'll bring it in and pilot it for like a real project, so you can kind of compare apples to apples. And yeah, just go for there. But we won't just dive in without at least running a pilot prototype through it, and then running it, and then not only checking if it works for our team, but like if it's a tool that has a collaboration piece, reaching out to someone in engineering to kind of take a look and kind of compare and contrast and get their input as well. We haven't done that yet because, again, I just think the timing is not right. I think we're probably going to be looking at that towards the end of this year before we renew our InVision license. See where Sketch Teams is at in terms of their features. But it wouldn't be like a giant cutover. We have to come up with some sort of migration plan. Yeah, so a lot of time spent on tooling, mostly because you kind of want to standardize tools. You want to create some guardrails, create some constraints, so you kind of know what you're working with, make sure everyone's kind of using it the same way. Again, just to build up the efficiency gains there, and increase output.
The experience in determining which tools are better off for design systems between the three big tools: InVision, Sketch, and Figma?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've only really compared and contrasted Sketch and Figma. Both are very good, and Figma, I think, just put out a bunch of new features in this area. Sketch is really good for design systems because it lets you really build pretty elaborate components, and then those components, they can be nested into larger components, and their override system is fairly robust. One caveat is they don't really handle color overrides very well. And it is annoying. It is annoying how they handle color overrides, but by and large, I think Sketch is very good at componentization. We take an atomic design approach, and it's kind of an agreed upon approach between us and our front-end engineering team, and it's kind of a shared language. So we build these atoms like an avatar might be an atom, a component, and then we'd use that and put it together with a card and maybe bring in a link or a button, and then you can then create a component out of those components, and then you can put it in a library. So we have a UI kit library that's shared among the design team, where you can kind of grab these components and build bigger components with them, organisms. What I would like us to get to eventually is more canned components, more page layouts, things that help us kind of just grab your Lego pieces, throw them on the design, and then get to the problem solving faster. So Sketch is really good at that. Figma is pretty good, but because I wasn't on the professional, I couldn't really look at how it handled sharing a library, because the free version doesn't give you that feature. So it's probably comparable, but I can't say with 100% certainty. I don't know if anyone else has used like a UI kit in Figma and shared it with a team, but it's very doable in Sketch. And we keep our UI kit checked into version control. We use abstract, which is basically, it's like Git, but for designers. It's basically you can branch off of branches. You can merge your branches back into your master branch. If you're not familiar with Git, it's just a way to keep your files versioned and share them across the team. So we keep our UI kit versioned, and as we make changes to it, those changes then pushed out to the rest of the design team. I don't know if that answered your question. Hope so.
Actually, spurred up a few other questions. Yes, absolutely answered my question. Another question I have, maybe I missed this, or maybe we're going to get to it. When it comes to handoff, and particularly around design components, we talked about atoms, and I'm sure we're going to talk about organisms and such like that. Any particular mediums that we could perhaps learn from that, for example, we're using Storybook and such, anything that we could help hand off to a larger group of developers that might be easier from design to engineering?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because we're actually transitioning towards using Storybook. We don't use it now because we've been scaling up our front end team. Let me take a step back. Before I moved into the position I'm in now, running product design, I was head of front end engineering. So it was easy to kind of keep tabs on, like, did the thing I built match design? Because it was, I would design it, then build it, or work with 2 other front end engineers to do it. What's happened now is we've scaled up to, I think we have like 7 front end engineers now. So that handoff process is completely broken down. And we're actually, looking at going from creating all the different components and molecules in Sketch, pushing them to Envision, Inspect, and then from there, handing them off to our front end team, and they'll bring them into Storybook, and then we'll kind of go through a feedback loop of like, hey, did this thing work as intended? Are the interaction designs right? The vertical rhythm, the colors, all those things, all the different permutations of our component. We haven't actually executed yet. That's our tentative plan. So I might turn the question back on you. How is Storybook working for you guys? We have high hopes for it. I hope
so far we are just onboarding. We're taking our components or organisms or atoms and porting it over there and working our ways to templates. We're seeing some good progress. We're in it about 2.5 months. We just hired a front-end engineer this year, so the outlook is positive so far. But we've been recently approached by the DSM team offering us some beautiful connections between what Sketch, our current I guess design tool, is to Storybook, and I'm wondering, is it true? Can you just take a design component in Sketch and port it over to Storybook? Do we need a front-end engineer to do the thing to port it over to Storybook, or is it just like wishful thinking and they're offering something that just doesn't exist as of today?
That seems like magical. What I would say for us, a big part of this componentization Storybook kind of equation is front-end component testing, right? Especially if you have a component that has interaction design in JavaScript. Storybook does provide a quick way for not only us to jump in and look at the component and visually inspect it and make sure it looks and feels the way it should and behaves the way it should, but if you have a component like a robust like calendar or date picker, something like that that has some JavaScript behind it and state, you can write those tests, and you can kind of use Storybook to have someone from QA or the front end team come in and quickly exercise the different state changes and those kind of things. So yes, it's a great tool for design and engineering to collaborate and make sure things look right, but it's also a fantastic tool for front end engineering to kind of exercise that component and make sure it works the way it's supposed to, whether it's at different screen resolutions or with different sets of data. So while I'm not in that camp any longer, I know that is a big positive for our front end team for bringing on Storybook. So maybe we can do like a joint talk together. Storybook, the story so far, pun intended. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Good questions. Thank you. Design tools. We did this. Yeah. Why aren't you using Figma? Maybe one day. Culture. All right. For me, design culture is the kind of engine that keeps all of this running, right? So we spend a lot of time I try to spend a lot of time keeping the design team happy and healthy. But culture accounts for, obviously retention, creating an environment where people want to work and stay for long periods of time, education, figuring out what skills are missing and making sure you can get the team training, whether it's training on new design tools or more research training. It's also onboarding team members, but also creating a safe place for kind of design criticism. Obviously, you're putting your work out there. That's kind of a natural thing in our team. We do a lot of design reviews. Sometimes you'll be like 90% done and be like, oh, what about this thing? And then we just blew up your whole design. We don't mean to, but usually at the end of it, we end up with something much better. I tend to say, like, never ever fall in love with your first idea, because it's usually very rarely does that first idea like you nailed it on this first thing. There's always a tweak or two or a remix. On our team, I mean, like I said, someone will pull a branch and remix a design pretty regularly. I think and I'm okay with that. I like that. I like getting different perspectives. Usually it leads to a much better workflow or design in the end. What else is on the culture? Oh, evangelizing design, amplifying the value of design across the team. I think it's really important to, and this is something kind of I've been working on for years, kind of changing hearts and minds. Selling design and research as, a force multiplier for other teams. Hey, sitting with engineers and talking about, hey, let's try it this way, or look at this design, or have you considered this? But that also extends to business development, marketing. We did an activity where we did a user journey map late last year, and we presented it. And it was really great for the design team because we got to work on personas, we got to work on how they flow through the products, and we showed it to, it was a specific ask for the VP, and it was to help get a handle on rewriting one of our older but more important bits of software. So just kind of getting a handle on who's using it and how they're using it, current state. What that work did, though, is expose us to our business development group. They really enjoyed it. Our sales and marketing group, they enjoyed it. Anytime you can kind of deliver compelling data and advocate for good design and good research, we're gonna take the opportunity to do so. And if people come to us and ask for design help or research help, even if we don't have the time, I think that's a great problem to have. Again, you're slowly trying to change hearts and minds with the design culture. All right. Just a slide on what you might expect, the bigger guys using design operations. It kind of goes without saying, before it was design trying to get a seat at the table. I'm not saying we're completely past that, but in a lot of ways we have a seat at the table, and it's like, okay, now what? Now design and research, the top companies have design ops, they're doing research. It's kind of, I would say, not necessarily expected, but if you want to be competitive, you have to care about design or research, because certainly your competition in a lot of cases does. I like to say that you're competing with products that are in the same industry, but you're also competing with your users' last best user experience. So you're competing with, maybe unfairly, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, so on and so forth. As people comfort level with software products goes up, their expectations go up as well. Just something to keep in mind, like why design is so important, designers and researchers, because grandma's on TikTok and she expects things to work a certain way, and this applies to engineering too. They expect things to be snappy and responsive. So just yeah, good design is good for business. Right, so that leads us to, like, when is the appropriate time to think about design operations? When I was researching this, and I'll get into like why Infotech went down this path, this was kind of like the themes I saw. Craft specializations, the idea of like, you're a designer or a front-end engineer, or you're wearing multiple hats, but that doesn't scale anymore. You're doing a little bit of design, maybe you're doing a little research, maybe you're doing a little front-end engineering. As the workload starts to pile up, that breaks down pretty quickly. So it's not really feasible for roles to blur anymore. Operating a design team at scale, right? So thinking about the Dropboxes and Slacks of the world. They have hundreds of designers, researchers. Certainly having everybody go off and do their own thing is not going to lead to good outcomes. So kind of creating those guardrails, creating those constraints, the tooling, the workflows, making sure everybody's kind of pulling in the same direction and working the same way is going to benefit the product and its users. And then Safe Harbor, I thought this one was pretty interesting. You know, again, kind of going back to being a designer on an island or a UX team of one, and maybe having multiple stakeholders coming in from all over the place, giving you crazy feedback, contradicting feedback, and just kind of, what do they say, the thrash of creative development. So, you know, you don't want design to end up in a place like where you get frustrated and throw your hands up and just say, you know, I think we've all been there. All right, just tell me what to do, because you're getting so many different inputs from so many different stakeholders. So kind of creating a space where you can kind of funnel that feedback from the different stakeholders and kind of organize it and turn into something a bit more meaningful.
And can you give a couple more examples of how you've fostered this safe harbor concept? Because we definitely see this a lot, right? And particularly in agency work where clients don't always know how to talk to designers. And so it, you know, and particularly working with larger corporations, you know, we're having multiple stakeholders from their company, you know, weighing in on things, and it can make it very difficult. So I'm curious if there's any you know, big things that you've found like that helped the most, and then adding all these additional things or anything like that.
So while I haven't done agency work, we do these, what do we call, we do design playbacks where we, once we've gone through a couple iterations of feedback internally with the design team, then we're ready to show it. We think we found all the major landmines, like all the kind of gotchas, or did you consider this? Did you consider that? We'll do a design playback, and that's going to bring back the engineering team, product owners, sometimes sales and marketing, kind of all of the periphery stakeholders. To be honest, unfortunately, we don't always get feedback, as much feedback as I would like in those meetings. I think people are afraid to kind of give that public criticism of a design. Some people are better than others. What I try to do is kind of give them a lob pass, like, oh, you know, I might mention like, hey, did you look at this thing here? Did you consider that? But yeah, you know, that's tough because we don't always get the feedback we want when we want it. And what ends up happening is it'll get to like engineering and then get to coding or card creation, and someone will come back and be like, hey, I don't really like this thing. And by that time, we're like long off that project. We're working on something else because we're working well in advance of engineering. And I'm just like, oh, okay. So what I try to do is like, this is good feedback. This is really good feedback, but based on schedule, we can't get it now. And I've, you know, we've talked to engineering, or I've talked to product owners, like, make sure if you see something, say something. If you guys don't like this or you disagree with it, you got to say it at the playback, because, you know, that's when we can take it in and that's when we can respond to it. Once that ship has sailed, it's not that we can't get back to it. It's just going to kind of go back into the hopper of being prioritized, redesigned, re-estimated, so on and so forth. So that's, I mean, that's the best advice I can give, is instead of being broadly, I try to address the person who gave the late feedback. Like, you're not wrong. You're definitely right. You know, we missed it. Oftentimes in a design playback, I'll say, hey, you know, we know we're going to miss things. So if you guys see something, please say something. Because, you know, we're only human. We're going to miss stuff for sure. Try to create a safe place for them to do that. When that doesn't work and I do get late feedback, I tend to reach out to them and say, hey, while we can't address this now, we'll take care of it later. You know, if you see something in a playback, just let us know. If you don't want to say it publicly, that's fine. Just slack us on the side. It's all good.
Kyle, I got a silly question.
Go for it.
How do you manage stress with, because I run a team, and it's like I kind of feel that I'm giving too much to my designer, you know, but no matter what tell me no, she'll just say yes, I'll do it. But then I'm like, okay, am I stressing her out, or am I putting too much on her? Because I always believe that when people are stressed out, they produce junk work. And I'm seeing accessibility picking up mistakes, and other developer picking up mistakes on her designs. So how do you handle a situation like that?
So with my team, you know, I'm very upfront about capacity. I want to get a sense of how much we can handle, and and have it be sustainable. I know there's times where you might need to work extra here or there, but I'm really interested in capacity. And I just asked my team, I'm like, okay, you've got this many, like I keep tabs on, we have a design board in Jira and we have a research board in Jira. And I do pretty regular check-ins, like, every Wednesday we do kind of a planning session to see what's being worked on, keep an eye on what's in the pipeline. And I try to check in and say, how much longer is this going to take? Do you need more time, et cetera, especially when feedback tends to push things out, right? We talk about like, oh, I'm 80% of the way there, got some feedback from my team, and now I'm back to like 40%. So kind of making sure like, hey, we changed the scope of this based on feedback, your date's going to change with it. Something we're doing now, because it's gotten quite popular, our research and our studies, it's again, good problem to have. People like, okay, user research is legit, I want more. So people are loading up our board, but Amber and I have kind of been pretty upfront about like, you're one researcher right now, we do want to grow the team, but let's figure out capacity. How many projects can you run in parallel? Like a large and a small, a large and a medium. So being really purposeful about how long studies take, and kind of tracking that. Again, I want to be clear, it's not to hold someone's feet to the fire because they blew a date. It's more like, this is like to your point, when work starts to break down, when stress starts to build up. And, we don't want that. It's kind of back to design culture. You want to keep people happy and healthy because that's when they're going to produce their best work. So I think I would just kind of frame it as like, hey, let's start tracking some of our efforts. Again, not to, and when people hear tracking work, they get immediately like, oh no, they want to make sure I'm working. Again, for us, it's less about that. It's more like being able to model capacity. So we can say yes to these projects and no to these projects and make a strong case for when you need to scale the team. But yeah, I would definitely encourage you to kind of keep an eye on that, because you don't want your designers or researchers to be burnt out.
Okay.
Okay. Right. Okay. So that was broadly kind of design ops, kind of the what's out there, boilerplate type stuff. I thought it'd be interesting to kind of provide some historical context from my perspective, and Infotech, how we kind of got to where we are. Also, a disclaimer, I've kind of been in this role for about 2.5 years, and this is still very much a work in progress. We're constantly tweaking workflows and tooling and handoffs and all the things. So, your mileage may vary, and that road pun was intentional. All right. So when I was hired, let's see, 14 years ago, I was brought on as a UI UX engineer. I was on one product, and my job was to go in Photoshop, make some comps, kind of show it to the team, come up with some designs, and then code it. I was very much the kind of UI UX team of one, trying to advocate for good design, good workflows, maybe more research, but very much my concern was like pushing the pixels on the screen, turning them into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. A couple of years later, I picked up a couple more products, started to introduce the idea of interactive prototypes, to kind of really hone in on interaction design, sharing those prototypes with other stakeholders, design. I didn't really have any design peers at the time, but other engineers. So getting feedback on those prototypes and working there, and then being pretty sure what you're going to code and why. No user research at this point, just kind of intuition, gut, stealing relentlessly from other apps that I liked. Then kind of rolled into stage 3. Some role clarity started to come in here. I was still in engineering, but I had 2 kind of UI UX designers, engineers underneath me. We had daily stand-ups, we had planning and prioritization. We started to build out our design system. We went from having a set of shared styles and into like building out some components, putting some rules around those components, like when to use a button versus a link, when to use a modal versus an overlay, kind of developing an opinion about when to use our components, building up those kind of guardrails, those constraints that would help us run faster, right? So like we had 3 front-end engineers, people knew what things should look like. There was a design language that was being developed, and more importantly, like do's and don'ts around our components. And we were very much doing like dual track agile, where we were working ahead, doing design work, maybe 2 to 3 sprints ahead of our engineering team. Our engineering team at this time was still pretty much, I would say, full stack developers, right? So they would do front end work and back end work. They never really made it look like the design. So my team would come back through and kind of make it more look like the design. They would just get it working and be like, we're done with this. So now we're at stage 4, working on making better data-driven decisions, doing a lot. We hired our first user researcher, shout out to Amber. We have 6 products we're in charge of. Again, the specialization's kicking in. I'm no longer in engineering. I'm in a new product design group. We have 2 designers, 1 researcher with plans to get more in the future. And we're doing this kind of tri-track agile where we're doing research, design, and engineering all in parallel, and they kind of play off of each other. Looking ahead, you have stage 5 where you're doing a lot more research and trend spotting to make better strategic decisions. And we've kind of dipped our toes in that. Prior to this meeting, I just came out of a meeting where Amber was going over some insights based on like some high-level research we did on a functional area of one of our apps, like one of the add-on services, and like we're trying to figure out who's using it, how other people are using it, do they like it? We want to answer some of these questions at a high level so we can make strategic decisions on like, do we want to make an engineering investment on this? So we're getting there. It's worth mentioning this kind of product design maturity. I didn't make this up. This is something that's out there. I'm using InVision's model right here. It's shorter. I like it. It's a little bit more condensed. I would say NNG they do a much deeper dive on design maturity, steps 1 through 8, and kind of help you figure out where your company is in the kind of design maturity model and how long it usually takes to go from one step to the next. I'll put it here in the slides. I'll share it at the end. It's super interesting stuff to kind of like do a self-assessment of where you are. But I just figured, like, how did you go from UX and UI team of 1 to where you are now? The short answer is it took a lot of time, and it was a lot of changing hearts and minds, and kind of again advocating for design, partnering with someone in engineering, and then slowly kind of selling it. Once you raise that bar, it's really difficult for it to slip back down. So I'm always constantly trying to raise the bar and using good design and user experience and research as the mechanism to do so. All right, why we embrace design ops. I think it's probably pretty clear. We specialized, right? We don't have a bunch of designers, but what we did have was specialization. We broke off from engineering. We added specialized roles of UX research and UI designers. And we also embraced a kind of Scrum design thinking process where we are doing a lot of research and design work up front. I'd like us to be 3 to 6 months ahead of the engineering team. And the reason the company kind of embraced this, the short answer, it's cheaper. It's way cheaper than engineering. I've been on projects where I went away for 6 months to a year and built the wrong thing. And let me tell you, not only does that sting, it costs a lot of money, like a lot of money. So it's just cheaper to kind of build out prototypes, get those prototypes in front of real customers, test them and get feedback, and then iterate, versus going away and engineering that solution. Back to that first slide, time to market is not the only measure of success, because if you get to market but you built the wrong thing, who cares? You didn't solve any customer problems. You didn't actually deliver real value.
I have a quick question on the Scrum
Yeah.
aspect. How you mentioned before that you're doing your design sprints in advance of development, of course. How far in between typically are you running? Like, are you running a sprint ahead, a couple sprints ahead?
It depends on a couple things. It depends on the product, right? So we have like early stage products where we might only be a couple sprints ahead, like fresh design, fresh workflow, something that hasn't gone to production yet. We're working on a larger rewrite for one of our more stable, like our biggest product. And I would say on that one, we have like units of work that are, we probably have enough design work to get them through the rest of the year, like that we've designed and tested. And now it's kind of going into that Scrum. The product owner is breaking it down. The team is estimating it. They're bringing us in to ask questions. But yeah, that product, like, yeah, we have 6 months of work easily.
Okay.
But because it is a big rewrite and we kind of know what we want to do and how we want to tackle this thing, and we can have conversations about feature parity. We have a lot we can pull from. That one, it's easy to get ahead of it versus like an emerging product. That's kind of like happening. I don't want to say in real time, but like only a couple of sprints ahead.
Yeah. I think that's about what we typically do, is sprint or two ahead, depending on how long it takes the client to go through the approval process on design work. Because sometimes you run into a client that goes wants like 10 revisions on the same design. So,
Oof.
Jeremiah, did you have another question? I noticed your hand was up. I just don't want to miss you. Cool. Okay.
Could just be a high five.
Go ahead and proceed, Kyle.
Yeah, okay, great. I know I've been mentioning design thinking and Scrum, so I just wanted to stop here and make sure at least touched on the differences between the two. You know, with design thinking, it's a bit of a buzzword, but it's basically kind of a process to empathize with your users, kind of go out there, do research, come up with solutions, and then test those solutions. Whereas Scrum is you know, very much an agile process. The product owner who organizes work into a backlog that gets broken down into sprints. Those things get work done and shipped. A cool thing about what we do, and something we've bought into culturally from the VP down to the engineer, is that designs kind of dictate the APIs, right? So we'll do a design and, you know, we'll work pretty closely with an engineering team, and it'll go into like a larger let's call it like architectural planning. And oftentimes I'll sit in on those or have one of those designers sitting on those, because again, you know, if we create an interaction where we're like, hey, we want to sort the data this way, or we want to do an infinite scroll, or yada, 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 those things dictate like RESTful endpoints or changes to GraphQL. And that's pretty powerful, you know, like the things you're doing is like dictating like the infrastructure and code you're going to need. So cool. Yeah, I think, yeah, you know, engineering, we're definitely, it's shifted a bit. We're on kind of like a bit of a level playing field where like figuring out what to build is just as important as the build process. And again, it stems from kind of embracing those mistakes in the past where we built the wrong thing. Like, okay, how do we prevent this from happening? No one wants that to happen. So that's why we very much have this design first process where design and research and strategy kind of run in parallel. And get worked into the engineering backlog. I stole this from someone else, but it's pretty good. So it kind of illustrates those 3 tracks, right? So kind of this understand is where the research is happening. You have a hypothesis for new features. You're testing actual click-through prototypes with InVision. You're doing usability tests on working software. All that's happening there. That oftentimes feeds right back into, you know, the iterate portion there, the design. So, you know, the researcher will hand off, here's what I learned, here are the insights. That gets baked back into the designs, and we kind of go through like, did we actually solve the problem? We refer back to that research pretty often. It's pretty cool when we hand off our research. We use Dovetail to keep it all organized, but like something was pretty important to me. And again, to kind of sell research was like, and it's more work. So, you know, bless Amber for doing this. We take video clips of the customers instead of just pull quotes. I want it to be really like tangible. I wanted it to kind of stop you dead in your tracks. When you see a customer struggle or give a comment on like, or just miss your design completely, it's just like, wow, that's really powerful. So we tend to include a lot of clips in our research reports, and they've been pretty successful. So iterations happening there, designs are getting tested. once they've kind of gone through that feedback loop, then they're going into the backlog, estimation is happening, and they're being broken down into the sprints and then released. And then when they're released, guess what? They're going back into user research. We have like success metrics. Hey, we put this new search in place. Are they using it? No, why aren't they using it? Let's redesign it. Let's do a call to action. Let's do an onboarding. So it's just kind of like constantly happening. It can be like super early ideas where we're just trying to test something and get it in front of customers, or it could be working software that we're following up on. But again, these are kind of the 3 tracks that are happening in parallel. It can be a lot to keep up with sometimes, especially the different stages of things, but I don't know, so far it's been pretty manageable. Again, it's back to like how many, I will say the context switching when you have 6 or 7 different products can kind of, be burdensome, but we try to wrap up and close out a thing before we move on to another feature on a wholly different product. But yeah.
So it looks like we do have a question in the chat. Tino, did you want to speak to your question?
I appreciate that. Thank you. How do you deal with frequent shift in prioritization? Sometimes they'll result in throwaway work, or even pausing work for a period of time.
Yeah, it's a good question. Fortunately, we haven't had too many constant shifts in prioritization. There have been design projects that we worked on, were tested, got to like the estimation process, but some other priority came up and it was completely shelved. And that stinks, because like you kind of need to refresh your context when you take something off the shelf, and you're like, a lot of times you're like, oh man, why did I do it this way? Or like I like to think that like whether it's coding or design, if I look at something I did a year ago and I'm like, oh man, this is awesome, I've done it wrong. Usually I look at it and I'm like, this is awful. What was I thinking? So that's the worst part about shelving something, because very rarely can you just get back into like, okay, I'm running at full speed again. It's like, I don't even remember what the problem we're trying to solve is. That's happened a couple times. The best way I've seen to prevent that, I mean, sometimes you can't prevent it, right? If the president of the company is like, hey, I want you to do this thing, and you talk to him about these are the other projects that are going, like, can we slot it in here? And he's like, no, I want it to be done instead of this other thing. There's not much you can do about that. You just try and close it out the best you can, take your notes, check it in, so on and so forth. But again, it's easier and it's better for it to happen in design before it goes in engineering. So maybe it's a crummy answer, but like it's better to put like a design project on hold and like put an engineering project on hold and like tear down that team or mobilize them on something else. It's sometimes not avoidable. I think the best way to potentially try and avoid it is then keep tabs on with your product owners, what's in the pipeline, what's coming, constantly like making sure the prioritization of the things you're working on still matter strategically. But yeah, sometimes you get a wrench thrown in there. What I like to call the new hotness. Sometimes the new hotness will sneak in and you got to work on that thing.
We use that term in our organization. I appreciate that.
No, new hotness, yeah. It's choice. This is the saddest slide because I ran out of time, but I wanted to kind of show some of the tools we use in the different kind of tracks there, kind of understand. Sorry, let me go back to reference, understand, iterate, and build. We're getting much better at Google Analytics. I'm using it a lot more. Hotjar, I don't know if you're familiar with Hotjar. Hotjar is a tool that we use to capture behavior analytics. So heat maps, session recordings and surveys like NPS or just in-app feedback. We use Hotjar a lot. I really like it. Dovetail is a tool we use to help with analyzing all the feedback we've captured, organizing it and storing it. It also has a pretty good feature for presenting the research findings. Application logs, we log a lot of things and we'll have engineers like query the logs for us and get us some more specific data. Obviously, we're using Zoom a lot during pandemic times to do user testing. Also under the research, we use Calendly for scheduling. Like we'll send it out and have people sign up and take spots in the sky. I'm saying we, our researcher Amber handles all of that. I don't do any of it. I'm the benefactor of said reports, So under design, we touched on it before, sketch, abstract, envision, kind of those things are constantly open by the designers on our team. Under envision, they have some other add-on kind of tools like freehand. We've used freehand in the past, basically a whiteboarding tool that's pretty good. Some other board features for kind of just organizing design inspiration. I've used that. But yeah, these are kind of our tools as of right now. Maybe in the future, Figma will make it up there. We'll see. Never know. What else? Yeah, that's it. We made it to the end.
Out of curiosity, have you played with XD, Adobe XD?
I have not. I've heard really great things though, but I have not played with it.
352 is making the switch from Sketch to XD. So.
Oh man, another gladiator has entered the arena.
It's pretty good. Prototyping and symbols and all the goodness.
I remember way back when. I'm sorry to cut you off. When
That's okay.
I thought InVision had solved it. They're like, we're releasing this product studio. It's going to be like InVision meets Sketch. I'm like, oh my god, finally! Man, they really screwed the pooch on that. What happened to that? But like, talk about hype train just going off the rails and crashing. But yeah,
their license fees like shot through the roof too.
Yeah,
that's part of what drove 352 out, is just because it got so ridiculously expensive.
Yeah, they sold a beautiful future that never came to pass.
Carlo, it looks like you've got your hand up. Did you have a question?
Can you hear me?
You can.
Yep.
Okay, I was wondering, how long have you guys been operating like that with that design philosophy?
To kind of design up front?
Like just the way you're like the research and then the design and then the build. Yeah,
I would say unofficially for like 5 years. Officially, where we have kind of role specialization, researchers and UI designers the last 2 years. The thing that kind of helped us turn the corner was I read a book by Google Ventures called Sprint. If you guys are familiar with it, it basically takes all these design thinking concepts and compresses it down into like a 5-day like sprint. Like, we have an idea, we're going to quickly hone in on that idea, we're going to come up with prototypes, and we're going to test those prototypes with real users. So I read the book, I kind of pitched it to our CTO at the time. I'm like, hey, I want to try this on a couple of these kind of lingering ideas we've had. And they said yes, and we ran a couple design sprints and had some really good feedback from our customers on some of the prototypes we created, and it kind of planted the seed for like, hey, what does more design upfront look like, and what value does it provide the organization? And I think if you lean into like where you failed, and I've been on a lot of software projects that failed because we built the wrong thing, you can start having that conversation like, hey, what do we try this? Like, why don't we just get this prototype out there? And that's kind of what the design sprint opened up for me, like this idea of rapid prototyping, real users getting feedback. Yeah, so unofficially 5 years, officially last 2 years.
So would you say it's been successful so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say it's been successful. Our engineers, they're to the point now where they're like, well, I don't want to work on this card. Has design seen this? Has this gone through design? We hear a lot of that now. It's always nice because they don't want to have to rework something, So.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I think it helps. It helps. I have an engineering background. I won't say it doesn't help. It definitely helps to be able to kind of live in both camps and speak to like, hey, what if we talked about it doing this way? I don't think you need it. I don't think you need it to be successful in this space. I do think you need access to engineering, though. I do think you need to be embedded with engineering. You need to sit with them, talk to them, get their feedback directly. We're not about throwing something over the fence. Building those relationships with engineering or business development or marketing or any other team is super crucial. And And I think that's kind of what starts, if maybe you can't jump into design operations, but there are certain like day-to-day things you can do. And that's definitely one of them, is kind of slowly advocating for design and kind of building those relationships with other people in that, product team.
Yeah, I mean, if you understand the whole process, it's gonna help you make better decisions rather than if you just come from one specific area.
Absolutely.
So let's go ahead and do our last question here, since we're already at the top of the hour here. Tino, did you want to ask yours? Did you still have a question?
Yes, please. If we can go one slide back. I noticed you had abstract and also, let's see. Thank you for all the credits and Unsplash. I'll go find those wallpapers.
Gotta do it.
I noticed you're using abstract and also Envision. You mentioned during your talk that you're using Inspect from Envision. I think the abstract also offers something similar with Inspect, but you're using Envision. Is there particular benefits you see with Envision over abstract?
So while we haven't really exhaustively tried it, I like Envision for getting feedback and kind of sharing out the prototypes with other stakeholders, and kind of getting that threaded feedback. I like how they handle it a little bit better than abstract. We did try it in our team, and I think it's good. What I like about abstract is seeing the different versions of a design. So while we have smaller designs, we want to get feedback on our team. I like being able to bounce between like what changed between these two versions, like any revisions, and kind of getting that feedback. Envision, we're using those click-through prototypes of real customers. We'll like give them the link or let them take control. I don't think we could do that with abstract, but really the number one job abstract is actually solving for us is version control. We used to use GitHub and something called large file storage, and it worked fine, but abstract is just that's the main job it's attempting to solve, is kind of version control for your design files. So that's what we mainly use it for, and it most of the time does that wonderfully. Sometimes it runs out of memory and just kind of falls down the stairs, but most of the time it works great. I think what we'll probably end up moving towards, because I think Sketch Teams has gotten a lot more robust, is using Sketch Teams for the kind of click-through prototyping and the feedback collection for like external stakeholders, the product owners, engineers, so on and so forth. But kind of TBD, we're probably going to revisit that at the end of the year. And I had a good run with Envision. I have nothing bad to say about them per se. So c'est la vie, though. Again, your design tools should make you faster and better. So if Sketch Teams can do a better job than Envision, then bid it adieu.
I will attest to Envision having a better product. I think I was just burned by Studio quite a bit. But Sketch Team, we recently moved away from Sketch Team to Abstract for handoff and such, and it's been a much better experience. But the collaboration and feedback part is still something to be desired on the Sketch Teams aspect. But there's 6 months left in the year, or a little bit more. I don't know what year or date it is anymore, but I'm sure they'll ship something new and cool. I have one additional question. You spoke about usage tracking. You gave an example around if a search feature was shipped, and is it being used, and is what the outcome of that is. I was wondering if you or Amber can help us understand what tools are you using to track that usage, and of course, what other sort of insights are you looking for? Rather, what other usage information are you looking for beyond someone's clicked a button, someone's completed a flow, and such? That will help you determine the success metrics? Yeah,
it's a really good question. So in this particular example, we had a pretty typical page, like a bunch of tabular data that I think you could sort the columns, but we introduced a search. But we're combating 10 years of muscle memory of people who just hit Control F or just scroll past it, and just kind of like more of this scanning. And we're trying to upsell the search feature. When we write success metrics at the feature level like that, we'll write a success metrics like we expect people to use a search instead of just scanning, and then we'll apply like They probably should have had a screenshot of this, but I'll talk through it. Then we'll kind of apply, that's our hypothesis. And then how do we test that hypothesis? So we have different tools. Like in this case, we could use Hotjar to check, like, is there a lot of heat around the search? Are people clicking it? We can check application logs, how many searches are being fired in a given month. And also kind of Google Analytics can do the same thing. So we came up with this hypothesis. We said, like, we expect these things to happen. We expect search to be successful, and we're going to follow up in a month and report back. We're actually coming up on the month this week, but I've looked at it. No one's using search. Like, no one's using it. They're scrolling right past it. When I look at the heat map and I look at the recordings, like 10 years of muscle memory, they go to the page, they see their data table, and they just scroll right past the search. So what we're going to report back is no one's using search. Our recommendation is, like, we redesign it. We bring more attention to it. In this case, we're kind of doing, like, what I would call like an experience layer type approach, which is like, we're going to start, we're not going to completely redesign the whole thing, but we're going to try and draw more attention to it. In this case, I think we're using like a little pulsating like call to action, where you can hover over it and it kind of upsell the search, and really trying to push people towards that feature adoption. Same thing, we'll push that out there, see how it goes, monitor it, and then kind of respond if needed. I would say on this page, there was a page tour, which kind of spoke to the search, but I think it was like step 3 of 5 on the tour. And we saw people are abandoning the tour after step like 3. So, but, success metrics, we're really kind of leaning into them more, and everything is kind of based on a hypothesis. We built this thing, we expect this outcome. Here's the tools we're going to use to track that. Here's who's responsible for different. So you might have a business analyst who might get application logs for us. Amber or myself might be responsible for kind of getting Hotjar metrics, like whether it's a screen recording or generating a heat map or Google Analytics. So even in that success metric, there's a little bit of like who's doing what and when we're reporting back.
I appreciate that. That was a super helpful answer.
Yeah,
All right.
you're welcome.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tonight. Carlo, I know I see your hand up. I do want to be respectful of everybody's time, so I'll let everybody jump. Kyle, if you have just a few moments, maybe we can talk to Carlo.
Yeah,
Thanks
fine.
again, Kyle, for your talk tonight. And thank you for all for coming with some amazing questions. And much appreciate the conversation tonight. I thought this was really productive and helpful, even to me, even though I'm a lowly researcher. So our next meetup is going to be on June 1st and is going to be featuring the fabulous Jennifer Ford, who is the Director of Marketing and Communications at the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications. And as a reminder, the Start GNV Onward and Upward Benefit Concert that I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation today is going to be on May 15th. Tickets are available if you go to Start GNV on the Facebook page. And there are a number of job openings available in the Gainesville area. If you guys are looking for anything, you can again go to the startgnv.com website /jobs. And there's a number of listings on there, including front-end engineer position at Infotech, where you can work with Kyle and Amber and Hank. So there's also other design positions as well as at SharpSpring, Admiral, and a gaming designer position at Chromatic Games. So definitely scope that out. Again, everyone, thank you very much for your time tonight. Hope to see you guys next month. And again, Kyle, if you could stay on for just a couple minutes and we can continue our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks all.
again.
Thanks.
Nice
Thanks,
job.
everyone.
And for anybody still on, I will drop the job links onto the event page for the meetup group.
How might we post also on jobs? That'd be wonderful as well.
Let's see. Post it here. All right, Carlo, are you on?
Yeah, you actually answered my question. Thanks.
Oh, look at that.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, then in that case, everybody have a great night. Thank you again. See you next time.
Okay, thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yep, you're welcome.